Clara sat at the small kitchen table, staring out the window as the wind howled through the trees outside. The rain pattered against the glass, a constant reminder of the cold, lonely world that surrounded her. It had been 3 years since her husband Jack had passed away. He was kind, hard-working, and always there for her. Yet now, with his absence, Clara felt as if something deep inside her had broken. Their home, which had once been filled with laughter and the warmth of shared moments, now seemed empty. The creaking floorboards and the ticking of the old clock on the wall were the only sounds that filled the silence. The walls of her cabin, nestled deep in the countryside, felt like a cage. The small rural town was miles away, and the only people she saw were the neighbors, but they were too busy with their own lives to notice the pain Clara carried every day. She had tried to move on. She'd tried to immerse herself in work, tending to the garden, fixing things around the house, and even trying her hand at painting. But none of it brought her the joy she had once known. Nothing could replace the presence of Jack. Every corner of the house reminded her of him: the old leather boots by the door, the faded fishing rod in the corner of the living room, the photograph of their wedding day sitting on the mantel. She would dust it every week, but the memories it held always brought a fresh wave of sadness. Clara had always been a strong woman, someone who kept her emotions to herself and carried the burdens of life quietly. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the moonlight slipped through the curtains, she couldn't stop the tears. She missed the sound of Jack's voice, his laughter, the way he would hold her hand as they sat together on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the hills. Now those moments were nothing but shadows of a time that had passed. She had spent so many months locked in her grief, unable to find a way out. Her friends from town had tried to help, encouraging her to visit, to meet new people, but Clara could never bring herself to do it. It felt like a betrayal to even consider moving on without Jack. She often wondered if she would ever be able to feel truly alive again. One chilly afternoon, as Clara made her way into town for supplies, she noticed a man standing outside the general store. His tall, broad figure caught her eye as he unloaded hay bales from a wagon. There was something about him, something that made her stop and stare for a moment longer than she should have. He wore a worn hat, a faded shirt, and well-worn boots that had clearly seen many days of hard work. His face was rugged, his jaw strong, but his eyes were kind. Clara couldn't help but notice the softness in his gaze, even though he had the look of a man who had worked with his hands all his life. The man caught her looking at him and smiled. It was a brief, polite smile, but it made Clara feel something stir inside her. She quickly turned her eyes away, feeling embarrassed for staring. She had no reason to feel drawn to this stranger, but something about him felt familiar, comforting even. She couldn't quite place it, but she continued on her way into the store, her heart beating a little faster than usual. Later that day, after she had finished her errands, Clara found herself walking back toward her cabin. As she passed the old barn, she saw the man again, this time walking toward her. She could feel her pulse quicken, and she tried to ignore the way his presence seemed to fill the air. "Hello there," he called out, his voice deep and warm. Clara turned, startled by the sound of his voice. "Oh, hello," she replied, forcing a smile. She wasn't used to speaking to strangers, especially not men, and especially not men who seemed so striking. "I'm Zane," the man said, walking closer. "I just moved in up the road near the old Johnson farm. Thought I'd introduce myself." Clara nodded, trying to make conversation. "I'm Clara. I live just past the old creek." Zane smiled again. There was something about his presence that felt calming, like a weight lifting off her shoulders. "I've heard of you. People around here talk about you." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what do they say?" "Mostly good things, I reckon," he said with a light chuckle. "They say you're a good woman, a hard worker." Clara didn't know whether to feel flattered or uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being spoken about in such a way, but something about Zane's easy smile and the way he spoke made her feel at ease. "Well, I try my best," she said, glancing down at her boots. "Nice to meet you, Zane." "You too," he said, tipping his hat. "If you ever need help with anything around the place, or with anything, really, just give me a shout. I'm not far." Clara smiled politely, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. "Thank you," she replied. "I'll keep that in mind." As Zane walked away, Clara found herself watching him for a moment longer than she meant to. He was tall, his broad shoulders making him look like someone who could handle anything the world threw his way. And yet there was something in his eyes. something soft and gentle that made Clara feel safe. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a flicker of something inside her, something she hadn't felt since Jack's death. It wasn't love, not yet, but maybe it was the beginning of something new. She wasn't sure what it was, but she knew she had to find out. As the wind began to pick up and the sky darkened with the promise of more rain, Clara walked home, her mind filled with thoughts of Zane. The loneliness that had gripped her heart for so long didn't seem quite as heavy now. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the grief that had held her captive for so long. But Clara knew she wasn't ready to let go of the past entirely. Jack's memory was too strong, too fresh in her heart. She would never forget him, and she wasn't sure if she could ever love someone else. But she wasn't ready to shut herself off from the world either. Maybe Zane was the beginning of something, even if it was just a new friendship. As Clara reached her cabin, she stopped and looked out at the horizon. The rain had started to fall, and the world outside was dark and quiet. Inside, the light from the fire flickered in the hearth, offering warmth and comfort. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a small spark of hope. Maybe life wasn't over after all. The days that followed the brief meeting with Zane were strangely different for Clara. It wasn't that she was obsessing over him, but his presence had somehow lingered in her thoughts. She couldn't quite explain it. She'd never been the type to let a stranger affect her so much. But something about Zane felt different. He wasn't like the others in town. He didn't seem to have any expectations or judgments about her, unlike the polite but distant greetings she usually received from the local townsfolk. As the weather continued to change, Clara found herself noticing more and more things about her surroundings, things she had once taken for granted. The trees in the distance were starting to change color, their leaves turning golden and amber as autumn crept in. The creek by her cabin, usually quiet, now carried a louder, more soothing sound as the rains had made it swell. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the promise of change. Clara, for the first time in what felt like years, allowed herself to breathe in deeply, taking in the beauty of the world around her. But it wasn't just nature that had begun to feel different. It was her own sense of self. She had spent so long focusing on the past, on her grief, that she had forgotten how to truly live in the present. Zane's simple words, his offer of help, had awakened something in her. She hadn't realized just how isolated she had become until she felt the pull to seek out his company once again. One late afternoon, as Clara was gathering wood for the fire, she heard the sound of hooves approaching from the direction of the road. Looking up, she saw Zane riding his horse toward her cabin. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly tried to compose herself, pushing away the sudden rush of nerves that she wasn't used to feeling. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon. Zane pulled up in front of her cabin, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "Afternoon, Clara," he greeted her, his voice as warm and familiar as the last time they spoke. "Afternoon, Zane," she replied, a little surprised to see him but glad for the company. "What brings you by?" "I was out riding," he explained, "and thought I'd stop by. The storm's coming in strong, so I wanted to make sure you're set for the night. Don't want you to be caught out in the cold if it gets worse." Clara smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. "That's very kind of you. I'm just about done here," she said, glancing at the pile of firewood she had gathered. "But I appreciate the offer." Zane nodded, his eyes scanning the area. "I'll take care of the rest," he said, moving toward the pile without waiting for her response. For a moment, Clara stood there, watching him. She felt an unexpected warmth at his words, at the way he had simply taken charge without asking. It was as though he didn't need permission to help, as though it came naturally to him. It reminded Clara of the way Jack used to act, always looking out for her, always making sure she was comfortable and cared for. Zane worked quickly, stacking the wood with practiced ease. His movements were smooth, deliberate, and strong. Clara found herself watching him, not just as a man helping her, but as someone who seemed comfortable in his own skin, someone who knew exactly who he was. There was something calming about his presence, something that made Clara feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "You don't have to do this," Clara said after a moment, though she didn't make any move to stop him. "I can manage." Zane looked up from his task and smiled softly. "I know you can. But I want to help." "I don't mind." Clara felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words. She had never really let anyone help her before, not in this way anyway. After Jack had passed, she had grown used to doing everything herself, convincing herself that asking for help was a sign of weakness. But Zane's presence, his quiet confidence, made her rethink that belief. Maybe it wasn't a weakness to accept help. It could be a way of allowing someone else to care for you, just as Jack had cared for her. Once the firewood was stacked neatly by the door, Zane stood up and dusted his hands off. "That should do it," he said with a satisfied nod. "You'll be good for the night now." Clara smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude toward him. "Thank you, Zane. I don't know what I'd have done without you." He gave her a small shrug, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's no trouble at all." They stood there for a moment, the air between them thick with unspoken thoughts. Clara felt something shift in her, a quiet longing, a desire for something more than just the silence and solitude of her life. She wasn't sure what it was, but she knew that her connection with Zane was unlike anything she had ever felt before. "I don't usually get many visitors," Clara said, breaking the silence. "I've been alone for a long time." Zane's expression softened, and for a brief moment he seemed to understand something deep inside her. "I know what it's like to be alone," he said quietly. "I've spent a lot of time on my own, too." Clara met his gaze, surprised by the honesty in his words. She had assumed Zane, with his strong, independent demeanor, had never known loneliness. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw a depth there, a quiet understanding. "I didn't expect to find myself here," he continued. "But sometimes life leads us to places we never thought we'd be." Clara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had felt that same sense of being led to this place, to this moment, though she had never quite understood why. But now, standing here with Zane, she realized that maybe life had a way of bringing people together, even when they least expected it. As the sky darkened and the first raindrops began to fall, Zane turned toward his horse. "I should get going before the storm gets worse," he said. "But if you need anything, don't hesitate to call me. I'm not far." Clara felt a rush of warmth in her chest. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. Zane smiled, tipping his hat again before mounting his horse. "Take care, Clara." "You too, Zane," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. As Zane rode off into the gathering storm, Clara stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the rain. She didn't know why she felt so strongly for him so quickly, but she knew that something had changed within her. The loneliness that had once felt unbearable now seemed a little less heavy. She wasn't sure where this connection would lead, but she was willing to follow it, whatever it might bring. The days following Zane's visit seemed to stretch longer than usual. Clara went about her daily tasks, but her mind often wandered to the quiet moments she had shared with him. It was as if he had brought a fresh breath of life into her routine, a spark that hadn't been there in years. Despite her desire for connection, Clara knew it was more than just curiosity that drew her to him. She felt something deeper, something that both excited and scared her. As the evenings grew colder, the nights started coming sooner. Clara, like always, spent the long hours after sunset by the fire, reading a book or knitting, trying to keep herself busy. But there were still moments when her thoughts wandered and she found herself wondering what Zane was doing. He had promised to help her if she ever needed anything, and while she didn't want to take advantage of his kindness, a part of her longed for his company again. One particularly stormy evening, Clara sat by the fire listening to the wind battering against the cabin. The rain fell in sheets, the sound louder than any noise she had heard in weeks. The storm had come out of nowhere, and the once clear sky had turned dark in the blink of an eye. Clara found herself feeling uneasy. The storm was much stronger than the usual evening rains. It was the kind of storm that made you want to stay indoors, safe and warm, with someone by your side. As the wind howled, Clara heard a familiar sound, the thud of hooves against the wet ground. She stood up from her chair, moving toward the door, unsure of what to expect. When she opened it, there stood Zane, drenched from head to toe, his hat barely staying on in the wind. His horse stood behind him, looking equally soaked but calm. "Clara," Zane said, his voice muffled by the storm, "the weather's getting worse. I didn't want you to be alone out here. Can I come in?" Clara blinked, surprised by his sudden appearance, but she quickly stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. "Of course. You're soaked. Come inside before you catch a cold." Zane entered the cabin, and Clara quickly shut the door behind him, She could feel the warmth of the fire fill the space between them, but the cold, wet air that followed him made the cabin feel chillier than before. "Thank you," Zane said, shaking the rain off his jacket and moving toward the fire. "I wasn't sure how bad the storm would get, and I couldn't leave you out here alone." Clara didn't know what to say. She had always been independent, used to taking care of herself, but Zane's presence made her feel a sense of comfort she hadn't realized she needed. "Let me get you something dry," Clara said, moving toward the bedroom. As she pulled a thick wool blanket from the bed, she noticed that Zane had taken off his wet jacket and hung it near the fire to dry. He was standing near the hearth, looking at the flames as if lost in thought. His broad shoulders and strong posture made him seem at ease, but there was something vulnerable in the way his eyes flickered to the flames. Clara returned with the blanket, handing it to him. "You should wrap up in this or you'll never get warm," she said, her voice soft. Zane took the blanket with a grateful smile. "I'm not used to storms like this," he said, wrapping the blanket around his shoulders. "It's a lot worse than I thought." Clara smiled back, but there was a quiet tension in the air now, one that neither of them seemed to acknowledge out loud. For a moment they just stood there in silence, listening to the storm outside. It felt almost as if time had slowed, and in that moment, Clara could feel the weight of the connection between them. It was unspoken but strong, as if they both knew something was changing, but neither was sure what it would mean. "You know," Zane said after a while, his voice low, "this storm might last for hours. You're going to need company if it keeps up like this." Clara looked at him, startled by the suggestion. I don't mind being alone. I'm used to it." Zane's eyes softened. "I know, but it doesn't have to be that way tonight." There was a long pause. Clara knew what he was offering, and part of her longed for it. She didn't want to be alone tonight. The storm made everything feel so uncertain, so unpredictable, and Zane's presence felt like an anchor, something solid she could hold on to. She looked down at the floor, unsure of what to say. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You're right. It's nice to have someone here." Zane took a step closer to her, his gaze not leaving hers. "You don't have to be alone, Clara, not tonight. Not anymore." Clara felt her heart race at his words. Something inside her stirred, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a mix of longing and need. She didn't know if it was the storm outside or the emotions that had been building up inside her for so long, but suddenly the distance between them felt too far. Before she could stop herself, Clara took a step forward. "Zane." Her voice trailed off, unsure of what to say. Zane reached out, his hand gently resting on her arm. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You don't have to say anything. I'm here." Without thinking, Clara closed the distance between them. She lifted her hand to his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin through the fabric of his shirt. Zane didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in, his lips brushing against her forehead. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was a quiet promise, an understanding that neither of them had to be alone anymore. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cabin the fire crackled and burned brightly. Zane's arms wrapped around Clara, holding her close as if to shield her from the cold and the world outside. For a brief moment, Clara allowed herself to lean into his embrace, to feel his warmth, to feel cared for. As the storm continued to rage, Clara knew that something had shifted between them. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, wrapped in Zane's arms, she didn't need to know. She had found something she had longed for without even realizing it. A sense of connection, a feeling of being seen, of not having to carry the weight of the world alone. And as the night stretched on, with the storm outside and the warmth of the fire inside, Clara allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she was starting to heal. The days after their conversation on the porch felt different somehow. Clara couldn't quite explain it, but there was a shift between her and Zane. They were no longer two people simply passing through each other's lives. Something deeper had begun to grow between them, a bond forged from shared moments, quiet conversations, and a growing understanding of one another's pain and joy. Clara had always been a woman of routine, someone who kept her emotions guarded. But with Zane, she felt like she could finally breathe. It was as if the walls she had built around herself had begun to crumble, brick by brick. Each day with him felt like a step toward healing, a way to move beyond the grief that had consumed her for so long. Zane, too, had changed. Though he was still the quiet, strong man who had arrived at her door all those weeks ago, there was a softness in his eyes now, a gentleness that Clara hadn't seen at first. He cared for her, not out of pity or obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to be there for her. He had found something in her, too, something that made him want to stay, even if only for a little while longer. One crisp morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, Clara found herself in the garden, tending to the flowers that Jack had once planted. She had always loved tending to the garden, but now it felt like a way to honor the life she had shared with him. Zane had joined her, offering to help with some of the heavier lifting. They worked in silence, the only sound being the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. There was no need for words. The peace between them spoke louder than anything they could have said. After a while, Zane stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans, glancing at Clara. "You've made this place beautiful," he said, his voice warm. Clara smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "Jack and I worked on it together. He always said it was our little piece of the world. It felt right to keep it up." Zane nodded, understanding the quiet reverence in her voice. "He must have been a good man." "He was," Clara said softly. "He was my world for so long." The conversation lingered between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Clara had never fully realized just how much she had carried in her heart. The memories, the loss, the longing. But now, with Zane beside her, it felt like she could finally put some of it down, even if only for a little while. Later that afternoon, as they sat on the porch sipping tea, Zane turned to her with a serious look on his face. "Clara," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day when you told me you weren't sure if you were ready for everything. I want you to know that I'm not in a hurry. I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for." Clara felt a flutter of emotion at his words. Zane had always been kind, but hearing him say that made her feel like he truly understood her. She had spent so long protecting her heart, afraid of letting anyone in, and now, with him, she could feel herself slowly opening up. "I don't want to rush things either," Clara said, her voice steady. "I've been living in the past for so long, and I'm still learning how to move forward. But I know that whatever happens, I want you to be part of it." Zane's expression softened, and he reached over to take her hand in his. "I'm not going anywhere, Clara. Not unless you want me to." They sat in silence for a moment, their hands intertwined, as the setting sun cast a golden glow over the cabin. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them together in the quiet peace of the evening. The next few weeks passed in a gentle rhythm. Clara and Zane's connection deepened as they spent more time together. They worked side by side, shared meals, and found comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't just about romance. It was about something deeper, something more enduring, a friendship that had blossomed into something more. One evening, as they walked along the creek near her cabin, Zane stopped and looked at Clara, his gaze serious. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "I've been offered a position back at the ranch. It's a great opportunity, but it means I'll have to leave soon. I don't know how long I'll be gone." Clara's heart sank, though she tried to hide it. She had known that Zane's time in the area was limited, but hearing him say it out loud made it feel all too real. The thought of him leaving, of returning to the solitude she had known for so long, felt like a loss she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. "I understand," she said quietly, her throat tight. "You have to do what's best for you. I don't want to hold you back." Zane shook his head, stepping closer to her. "You're not holding me back, Clara. But I want you to know that what we have, it's not over just because I leave. I'll carry it with me wherever I go." Clara felt a rush of warmth in her chest at his words, though she knew the pain of his absence would be hard to bear. But she also knew that what they had shared was real, something worth holding on to, even if it meant facing the uncertainty of the future. "I'll miss you," Clara said softly, her eyes meeting his. Zane smiled, his eyes filled with affection. "I'll miss you too. But this isn't goodbye, not really. I'll be back, and when I do, I'll be here for you, just like I promised." And so, as the seasons changed once again, Clara faced the future with a new sense of hope. Though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew that she had found something special in Zane. She had found a kind of love she hadn't expected, a love built on understanding, patience, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. As the days passed, Clara realized that she had finally found the peace she had been searching for, not in the past, but in the present. With Zane by her side, she knew that she could face whatever came next, together or apart, and that she would always carry a part of him with her, no matter where life took them. The days after the storm passed were quieter than usual, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something within her had shifted. The rain had stopped, the clouds had parted, and the world outside seemed a little brighter, but inside Clara's heart things were still unsettled. Zane's visit had left an impression on her, one that went beyond the warmth of the fire or the safety she had felt in his embrace. There was a connection between them now, something deeper, something she didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. For days after the storm, Zane continued to check in on her. He wasn't overbearing, but his visits were regular enough that Clara found herself looking forward to seeing him. It wasn't just the practical help he offered, though that was certainly appreciated. It was the way he made her feel, seen, understood, and less alone. His presence brought comfort in a way that Clara hadn't known she needed. It was a cool afternoon when Zane knocked on her door again. Clara, who had been cleaning the house, wiped her hands on a towel and went to answer it. She opened the door to find him standing there, smiling as always, but this time, there was something different in his expression. "Afternoon, Clara," he greeted her. "I was just passing by and thought I'd see how you were doing. The weather's been nice lately, but I know how hard it can be to keep up with everything alone." Clara smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest at his kindness. "I'm doing okay," she replied, "but I wouldn't mind some company. It's been a quiet week." Zane stepped inside and Clara quickly closed the door behind him. She led him to the living room, where the light from the window illuminated the space with a soft golden glow. The cabin felt like home now, with the fire always crackling, the scent of wood and lavender in the air, and the small touches of life that Clara had added over the years. Zane sat down on the couch, his usual calm demeanor settling into the room. "You know, I've been thinking," Zane began after a moment, his voice low and thoughtful. "I'm not sure how much longer I'll be staying around here. Work on the ranch is picking up and I may need to move on soon." Clara felt a pang of something she hadn't expected. Disappointment. She hadn't realized how much she had grown accustomed to Zane's visits, to his presence in her life. The thought of him leaving, of returning to her quiet, solitary existence, made her feel suddenly cold. "Is that so?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Zane nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "I have responsibilities, and as much as I enjoy the peace here, I've got to do what I came to do. I didn't mean to get too comfortable." Clara's heart felt heavy, but she nodded in understanding. She knew Zane was a man who had his own life to lead. He had come to the area for work after all, not to settle down. She didn't expect him to stay forever. "You've helped me more than you know," Clara said, her voice soft. "I'm grateful for the time you've spent here." Zane reached out, his hand brushing hers lightly. "I'm glad I could help," he said. "But I don't want you to feel like I'm just here out of obligation. You've become important to me, Clara, more than I expected." Clara's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and vulnerable. She hadn't expected him to say that, and yet it made sense. She had felt it too, the way something had changed between them, something that couldn't be ignored. "I think about you," Zane continued, his voice quieter now, "more than I probably should. And it's not just because I've been helping you. It's because I care about you." Clara felt her heart race at his words. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She had always kept her feelings carefully hidden, especially after Jack's death. She had never allowed herself to think she could care about someone again. But with Zane, everything felt different. She had never felt this way before, this deep connection, this pull toward someone. She took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. "I care about you too, Zane, more than I should." Zane's eyes softened and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to be afraid, Clara. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just want you to know that I'm here, for you, if you need me." Clara looked down at their joined hands, feeling the weight of his words. She wasn't ready for everything Zane offered, but she was ready for something she hadn't been willing to let herself feel in a long time. She was ready for connection, for the warmth of another person who cared, and in that moment Clara knew that she didn't have to carry the burden of loneliness any longer. The days passed in a haze of new emotions. Clara's feelings for Zane grew stronger with every passing moment they spent together. There were still moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether she was moving too fast or if she was simply filling the emptiness left by Jack's passing. But when Zane was near, all of those doubts seemed to disappear. Their relationship wasn't rushed, but it was undeniable. There were shared glances, quiet touches, and long conversations that went deep into the night. They didn't need to say everything out loud. They understood each other in ways that words couldn't express. Zane had a way of making Clara feel seen and understood, of making her feel like she wasn't alone in the world anymore. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a rich shade of purple, Zane and Clara sat outside on the porch watching the stars begin to appear. The air was cool but not uncomfortable, and the silence between them felt easy, not strained. "I don't want to leave," Zane said quietly, breaking the silence. "But I also don't want to leave you with an empty space where I once was." Clara smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest at his words. "You don't have to leave yet," she said. "There's still time, and when you do go, I'll understand. But for now, we have this." Zane nodded, his fingers gently brushing against hers. "For now, we have this." And with that, they sat in comfortable silence, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees around them. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. She didn't feel alone, and as long as Zane was there, she didn't feel like she had to be.